Support comes from Mosby Building Arts, helping homeowners trade out old windows for modern, energy-efficient windows with curb appeal. Estimates at callmosby.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. Artist and educator Carmon Colangelo retired at the end of April after 20 years as the founding dean of Washington University's Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts. As an innovative printmaker, Colangelo mixes media and combines old and new techniques. A survey show of his work is on view through late June at the Bruno David Gallery in Clayton. For the remainder of today's show, we're going to listen to a conversation between Colangelo and STLPR Arts and Culture senior reporter Jeremy Goodwin. After discussing Colangelo's brief stint as a semi-pro soccer player in Poland, they discussed his time in college and how it was formative to his career as an artist and as an academician.
Yeah, I think when I went to college and I wanted to study art, I didn't really have a background. My parents were, being working class family, we didn't really go to museums and understand maybe what an artist was. So I thought it would be a designer. And, in college in Canada, most of it was focused really on fine arts. And, printmaking lent itself to a kind of understanding of technology and also, working with materials and presses, and seemed familiar to me, in terms of like learning a trade almost. Like I thought of it like, if I'm going to make art, I should make something that I can do or that the university offered, and not, paint, for example, where I could have done that in my garage. So I thought, well, this was something I was learning, it was going to be eventually a trade. And then, later when I was a graduate student and I had a chance to teach lithography, and I realized there was so much knowledge that I had gained and was able to disseminate, and through practice and through teaching, and it got me jazzed up because there was a lot of joy in seeing others make interesting work, and to teach them process was really to show them how to do something special, magical. Really, printmaking is kind of magical.
Well, let's talk about the art then for a bit.
Yeah,
I saw a quote from you. I'm just trying to find it here. You said, my work is kind of about discovery. Mm-hmm. Can you unpack that for me? What were you thinking of?
Well, I think, the process of making art, especially as I became more experienced, was really, and especially through the process like printmaking, where, you actually put a mark on in my case, lithography would be on a stone, a Bavarian limestone. So already there's something, kind of magical about the surface of the stone. And then it's a chemical process that that you draw with grease, and then, then you have to process the stone chemically so that it will accept ink, so it works on the antipathy of grease and water. And already now you have a mirror image of the thing, you have a print of the thing, and you see it come through the press, and you pull it up on the paper, and you're like, wow, that's something you didn't expect, and it looks cool. And that discovery, that kind of experimentation, that kind of unknown of what's going to happen, there's a kind of the idea of innovation comes from discovering and trying different things and figuring it out how the process works.
Well, one thing you've done also is embrace technology, right? From photocopy machines to stuff that has come since then.
Yeah.
How has evolving technology entered into your work as an artist?
Yeah. Well, the artist that I was really interested in is the kind of the second generation abstract expressionists like Robert Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns, who worked with printmaking, and I could see that they were doing transfer images from newspapers and everyday life. I thought that was more accessible because I didn't really understand abstraction at the time, and that was sort of what was happening when I was in school, minimalism and abstract expressionism, and then this other generation. So printmaking would lend itself to this, transferring images, and Xerox machines were available. And then, printmaking, I wanted to do photo transfers in 1984. And when I was teaching at West Virginia University, the design faculty bought 4 Macintosh computers, the first generation. And we took one and we put it in the studio, in the print studio, or we worked with the printmakers. And we realized that we could do some of the photo transfer processes using a computer. And I wasn't a computer person at all, but the Mac made everything so easy. and it allowed us to make, off the negatives that we would normally go to make a halftone at a newspaper, we could make them in-house. And so all of a sudden we were sort of experimenting with computers, and lithography also lends itself to photographic processes. And so the merging of the old and the new constantly is what I think is so beautiful about art making in general, and printmaking has a lot of that embedded in it.
Is there an important distinction to make between using, say, a computer as a tool to execute the process you had in mind already versus the technology almost becoming the medium and leading you to a different result than you would have had?
Right. The argument always around the issue of whether it's a tool or it's something else is an interesting one. It's sort of been a seminal part of my career. If I went fast forward from 84 to 96, we did a conference called Remote Sensing. It was about printmaking was about to change on the cusp of the web, World Wide Web, and we made it, kind of this idea that just like the printing press, and Gutenberg, being able to distribute and disseminate more images, now we could do it worldwide at an instance. And so what did that mean? And there might not even be an artifact, there might not even be an object. So all of a sudden, people were, when we started to punt this idea, remote sensing as a metaphor, the idea that, you could see an object without physical contact, meaning that you could be anywhere. And we were in West Virginia, so this remoteness that you could be anywhere and distribute art, make art and distribute art became very interesting and very much about the egalitarian process of printmaking. But then we were still very interested in output too, so we would use analog and digital. Digital output was starting to occur. So that whole period of in my career, that first half really, I was still making stone lithographs, drawing on stone, very traditional process of the 19th century, and going back to earlier print products. This is like intaglio and etching, and woodcut, and those were all combined with digital. And so, I taught printmaking, so we also thought about the theory and thought about what its purpose was and how it was both a fine art medium, but it also sort of subverted the sort of high art ideas in some ways, because as a printmaker, you're kind of marginalized a little bit. You're outside the mainstream slightly. You're not in the, paintings or one-of-a-kinds or, images were privileged, especially then, and printmaking always was like, you could distribute them cheap, economically. There were multiples, so playing with all of those ideas, both as a practitioner, as an artist, and also as a faculty member and teacher and someone who ran print programs and graduate programs, it was important to think about the differences in not only the media but the market and all of those things. Yeah.
Have you seen students or early career artists using technology in a way that you saw that and said, actually, the technology is becoming the boss here? The artist is not in full control of what's happening?
That's a great question because generally, no. I would say, artists, from the very nature are somewhat sort of skeptical about things and question them. I think that they might adopt, like I'm an adopter, like I'm using AI now, and as soon as I knew that it was available language-based models, I would mix it with hand-drawing models because it just seemed like an extension of all the other things that have come our way, like from Xerox to computers to internet to, AI. But in fact, in some ways, I jump ahead faster than my students. The students will come in like.
But AI can act as the composer, though.
It can act as a number of things. It can act as a generator, composer. Again, the hybridity is natural to me. Like now, I'm using Midjourney. I mix the language-based part of it with image-based part. Without my images informing it, it just looks like everyone else's, just like Photoshop in its early years. Everything that was made in Photoshop looked like Photoshop. Mm-hmm. That's what you didn't want. I think for all of us that we're skeptical, it's like you don't want everything to look like everyone else's thing, So as an artist, you're trying to have, for lack of a better word, a style or a sort of way of working that's present in the work, that is of your own voice. And so I think a lot of the technology like Photoshop was really designed based on just printmaking principles, color separation and all the kind of things. So we understood it as a tool in that case. So Photoshop's a tool. It's like just a piece of software. Midjourney is a tool. That's like software. But the larger idea of AI, the larger idea of digitization and distribution through the internet, those are bigger than just a tool. I mean, they're a tool if you want to just disseminate, but then the next thing is what's the art form in dissemination? Even if you're an Instagram user, you have to sort of find a way to find a voice if you're, within all the noise, so it's not a very easy platform to find a voice really in a way.
But when you're using AI for art, you're not typing in a prompt, create an image for me that looks like XYZ,
No.
right?
My first image is in the exhibition, and it's called Bear Life and Big Melt. And the reason is I did a show at Bruno David Gallery when I first arrived. It was actually my second show. It was called Big Bang to Big Melt. It was about the sort of beginning and ending of the universe and the sort of absurdity of making art about that. But it was
the Big Bang to the Big Melt?
Yeah. And so the idea was it was about, the beginning and also the end in terms of, the environmental changes. And I was looking at it through the lens of the natural world, like animal life. And, I was making drawings of bears and other creatures as part of the work, like polar bears melting in the snow, that kind of thing, but abstract. And so when AI came out, I came back from an event that was out in Palo Alto, and I learned about what was happening in language-based models, and I started to say, what would I type in? And I thought, I'll take the text that we wrote or others wrote about that work back from that show, and it was like, then I would start to say, make an image with a taxonomy of animals, bears, birds, and then maybe, I would add a couple of other phrases about, conceptually what I was thinking about. And it would generate an image. The first images look like, they look stupid, really. So then I realized, the only way it's going to make an image that looks good is to inform it somehow by thinking about, I could give it another artist reference, which I didn't like that idea because then it's in their style. So then I figured out how to use image prompts with text prompts. So if I did a drawing, I did a watercolor even, and I then put it with the language, then it would be in my voice. It would come out looking aesthetically somewhat like my own work, and then I could take it into Photoshop and other things, and then in my case, I converted into photogravure and lithography and other traditional processes, or print on paper and paint, cut, and change it into physical objects. So by then it isn't on the screen anymore. It's in the real world. So it has my mark on it. It doesn't look like that thing. And that's the thing I'm fighting with all of these. I can generate hundreds of images in a day, animations, and that's just like a little bit insane. But then on the other hand, if I, like in all art process, you have to edit, curate, think about why you're doing it. And mostly I had to almost obscure many of the things that come from that machine in a way, or make it obvious in another way. Like, sometimes I show all the, in some of just I did this infinite abstraction series, and I show all the glitches in the technology as part of the mark, just like a drip would be on a painting. That's what sometimes they make it analogous to that. Yeah.
Carmon, when you're using generative AI creating artwork, this isn't someone who is pressing a button and getting an image for a poster instead of hiring an artist, that kind of thing.
Right.
You are an artist who is using that as one of the things on your palette.
Yeah, and I'm questioning it from the very beginning. Like, what does this mean? Like, what does it do, and what does it challenge? And in some ways, I'm going very skeptically. The first images, when I got Midjourney, beautiful. They were just beautiful, like seductively beautiful. I thought, that's no good. Be careful. So I started to rip them apart.
Why was that a problem?
Because I could tell right away that it was going to look like everyone else could do it. I could tell right away it didn't have any soul to it. It just was an image. It didn't have a meaning. It didn't have a reason to be in the world. It just was. Now all of a sudden you could generate fantastical, hallucinatory images fast, but didn't have my hand or didn't have anything to do with me unless I did something with it that I was familiar with in my own processes, which is usually to translate it into something else, another object or another thing, which in that process you're essentially mediating. You're mediating the image. Now it's like other things that I use, like I use scraps of models in architecture. They make models and they throw out the negative shape, and I started making prints from them. That a lot of those are in the show, discarded plates, and I give them another life. So in a way, the material of it is, it's just like another material. It's not necessarily the end in itself. It doesn't feel complete or meaningful unless it's translated into something. And plus, I also think there needs to be space between the time that these new things come out and to think about it. And it's okay to show the first ones, but we're really probably not good, like they're probably just like the first Photoshop images were not good. And, so criticality becomes so important, curating becomes important, and thinking about why you're willing to put your name on them or put them in the world, and so you're recontextualizing these things constantly.
That's artist and printmaker Carmon Colangelo talking with STLPR's Jeremy Goodwin. Colangelo retired at the end of April as the founding dean of Washington University's Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts. We'll have more of their conversation in just a moment. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from Gemma, architects, planners, and designers seeking to bring joy to their clients and communities. Details at gemastl.com.
Welcome back. I'm Elaine Cha. Let's return to STLPR Arts and Culture Senior Reporter Jeremy Goodwin's conversation with Carmon Colangelo. The artist and printmaker at the end of last month stepped down after 20 years as the founding dean of Washington University's Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts. Jeremy continued the conversation by asking about combining the disciplines of art and architecture into the same school.
The art school, was founded in 1879. It was one of the first art schools to found a museum, which is now the Mildred Lane Kemper Art Museum, but it used to just be a downtown museum as part of Washington University. And then it went on loan to the St. Louis Art Museum during the World's Fair in 1904, and the architecture school was founded in 1905. So these are all things that have been around a long time. So, but they physically shared the same part of campus, 3 buildings at the time, and then before I came in 2006, we opened what is the Mildred Lane Kemper Art Museum in Walker Hall, so then it became 5 buildings, and now Weill Hall is 6 buildings. But to go back to the idea of the conception, it was really Chancellor Mark Wrighton's vision to sort of bring the colleges of art and architecture together and the museum to create one larger school that would therefore hopefully be more prosperous, because the 2 schools were kind of too small to really have the kind of impact that he had wanted everything to be 5 stars, which was what drew me here. He drew me here to this vision. I love the concept of art and architecture being together, but often they're taught in very different schools, even though the foundation of architecture is often drawing, and there's lots of overlap. And then, the museum is often doesn't report directly in the school. It often reports at a university level. So this configuration is super unique and super wonderful because, in my view, the academic side of things, art, architecture, and design, which is also another area I would always say now, it's art, architecture, design, and the museum. And then having the museum really, some of the shows, as you know, they are bringing together, major artists from all over the world. And thematically, C.B. Nachman has been the director, and I've worked with her closely for 20 years. And she's been here 21 years. And the exhibitions are just really bring together not only great art, but really interesting themes around, what's happening today, whether it be environment or social political issues. And so and we have an amazing collection. We have 8,000 works in the collection, so students see work firsthand, so now with our 6th building, which is our graduate building at Weill Hall, we have the MFA art students, graduate art students, the IVC, which is illustration visual culture, and the architecture college graduate students, so it's the Master of Architecture, Master of Landscape Architecture, and Urban Design. So we have all these disciplines next to the museum. And the thing that I love to say as I describe the school, if you come to WashU and you come to the Sam Fox School, you can work on any scale. You can make an object or you can design a city. You're working both on the, the scale of monumental art, or you can make, landscapes. So, you've got kind of this in a research university. So our students are really able to do that, and the flexibility. So the interdisciplinary collaboration, the new building even has all those things in the same building. And I even push that further with the design of the building, which is I required art and architecture to be on every floor, so there couldn't be segregated. So the idea of like bumping up against each other and sort of working, on this larger project is manifest in the human aspect of the building. That, because just like anything, if you're not coming in contact with, diverse, populations, or in an environment where you're isolated, you're not getting the richness, the full richness. And we designed the building, which is really on the front door of campus, Weil Hall, that's very inviting. It's, people come from other parts of campus. It's like a park in front, and, it's
people like to come and see the vertical garden.
They love to come into the green wall and the vertical garden, Key to Court, and they come from all across campus, which is the part that I love about it, so that you could talk to a student there and could be from the business school on any given day, or even sometimes the med school, because they just come there to hang out, and it has a good vibe, it's
Are there concepts in a conversation about, say, architecture that a fine art student will hear in some way and apply to what they're working on?
Absolutely. And it's impacted me. My work, as a lot of it has come from the discourse around architecture, even though I'm working in art. In fact, I sort of embraced that right away, because you sort of get tired of the same old arguments, same old conversations, and even your own canon of making. And, artists definitely work different than architects. And artists think of metaphors and think about ways to express themselves and, how to give the work meaning. And architects are thinking about how to give their work purpose and to house people and to create social spaces. At the same time, they're dealing with often, how to express those values in the design of the architecture or the kind of quality of the spaces. And, I think the things that probably came up for me that I wouldn't have pushed as hard and are evident in the show is issues around environmental change, sustainability, equity, thinking about communities, thinking about, just the narrative that's going, that goes along with the built environment, which I think even today, a lot of people don't really understand the built environment affects the environment. I mean, the built world affects the environment, to which degree that we have to be really aware and care for how we plan cities, how we plan buildings, and how we repurpose, and also obviously the resilient aspect that we just have experienced here in St. Louis. We just did a conference Linda Samuels ran, Resistance as Resilience, and thinking like, again, that our city just went through this terrible tornado, and we have to rebuild the city. So you have to think about materials and even, what trees are we going to plant that will be more resilient in a new environment. So all those conversations they affect the way you think about what you make, like what you are expressing, because those are the issues of our time.
You sound very optimistic about the possibilities at a university that's organized like yours is.
Yes.
But there's the colleges and universities in the U.S. right now are obviously facing a lot of headwinds. Yeah. There's a presidential administration that's very concerned with the content of what people are actually talking about in class. Right. Ironically, under the aegis of academic freedom. But you're free to say this, but not free to say that. Yeah. What does that look like from your view?
Well, I think I'm optimistic in the sense that that I believe that this is a period that's being challenged in a way that seems unique to this period. But I think higher education will go through this transformation, maybe for the better in some ways, because it has to question itself too in terms of the value. Because I would say, even if I start with the financial aspect of sustainability for universities, like art schools are being closed because they don't have enough, resilience relative to their endowment. That and if students aren't paying, they don't have revenue, and if students pay, they're having debt. So that's not a sustainable system. But to go back to this the idea that what we need to do, I think, is we need to address what it is that a university provides. We can't take it for granted. I think we need to think about, because we are under threat in many different ways, whether it's the research side of things or, it's the or the cost of education, or it's AI, or it's, like what kind of environment do we need to be? And we've been through a lot. COVID taught us some things. I don't know if we learned enough from it, really, about how to operate. But I think, right now I would say, just like we talked about before, I think emerging technology, AI, is one of the things that we need to address head on. And I think it needs to be around innovation. I think it needs to be to respond to the existential threats of AI, as well as the actual technology and the technical skills, because, even if I look across our in front of our building, I look north to engineering and see the computer science, one of the fastest growing, majors, not so much anymore, because already now we don't need coders. We don't need these types of people because, that didn't sound right, but we don't need, there's not the job market for those young people that are going to make 100 plus, in their first year out. So now we're talking about, well, what kind of people do we need? And that maybe they have the awareness of the technology and insight, but are kind of able to look at it and bring something human to it, something intellectual to it, something critical to it, something creative to it. I don't know, but the fields are all changing very rapidly. And, that's the interesting thing, why I'm optimistic about artists in general and designers, because they are creatives and they tend to shine a light on the problems. They tend to look at things from a different perspective. They think differently. They don't just buy in. That's the thing. They can be entrepreneurial too and see business opportunities. That's not to say they can't, but I think that's not their main intention generally. So we have a strategic plan, and the three main pillars of the plan are digital transformation, how we address that, and the other is environment and sustainability, and the other is community. And they're all tied together, and the community being local, international, those are tied together too, being for St. Louis, but also having to be connected in the world, And the other part, I think that's, probably, changing so much is, the notion of inclusion and diversity has been so seminal to our mission, and now that's being challenged, and what that means is being challenged, and I don't think we can give up on that.
That's artist and printmaker Carmon Colangelo talking with STLPR's Jeremy Goodwin. Colangelo retired at the end of last month as the founding dean of Washington University's Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts. A survey show of his work is on view through late June at the Bruno David Gallery in Clayton.
This episode was produced, engineered, and edited by Jeremy Goodwin, with podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Hi, I'm Laura Hamden, and my colleague Jessica Rogan and I are your daily hosts of the Gateway newsletter. We meet with the editors in the STLPR newsroom every weekday to bring you the top local stories of the day in a quick and easy 6-minute read by 6 a.m. In an age of overwhelm, it's a refreshing, thoughtful take on the news day, if we do say so ourselves. Fine-tune your daily news habit with the Gateway newsletter. Subscribe at stlpr.org/gateway.